For a long time in Vietnam, the subject of homosexuality has been a highly complex and often taboo topic. Lying in a society with deeply rooted traditional family values, the LGBTQ+ community has frequently found itself surrounded by cultural stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. However, media representation plays an incredibly powerful role in shaping how the general public views and understands this community. This brings us to the central question and the title of our video essay today. Has the perspective on homosexuals in Vietnam changed over the past decade as illustrated through cinema? To answer this question accurately, we decided to narrow our research scope exclusively to theatrical films. We specifically chose this medium over indie films or web dramas because theatrical release target mainstream everyday audience. They reflect on the general public is willing to pay for and watch, making them a highly accurate mirror of our society's general attitudes, cultural shifts, and evolving tolerance. In this video, we will be analyzing 9 films in total that feature LGBTQ+ individuals as either main or supporting characters. To truly see how perspectives have changed, we have divided this film into 2 distinct eras. First, we will look at films released around 10 years downward. This era includes Hot Boy Nổi Loạn, Cầu Vồng Không Sắc, Em Chưa 18, and Để Mai Tính. Prior to the last decade, the topic of homosexuality was often not explored with much depth, and filmmakers frequently rely on surface-level tropes. During this time, LGBTQ+ representation often fell into 2 extremes. On one hand, you have films that tie homosexuality heavily to tragedy, hardship, or severe social rejection. On the other hand, in mainstream hits, homosexual characters were frequently seen as comedic punchline rather than fully developed individuals. Then, we will contrast these older portrayals with films from the last 10 years onward, specifically focusing on the movies titled Thơ Mẹ Con Đi, Song Lang, Từ Trăng Máu, Vợ Ba, and Thỏ Ơi. In this recent era, we start to see a significant shift. Filmmakers begin treating LGBTQ+ characters with much more empathy and depth. Instead of relying on stereotypes, these modern films explore nuanced, humanizing stories. Before diving in, please know that our goal today is not to critique cinematic elements like blood or acting. Instead, we focus on how the LGBTQ+ image is constructed, exploring the filmmaker's choices and what these portrayals reveal about Vietnam's evolving social landscape. To analyze the filmmaker's evolving perspectives, our group will evaluate these works by examining how these representations are built, focusing on their physical and emotional presentation, the complexity of their inner worlds, the societal and internal pressures they encounter, and their thematic roles within the films. To kick off our deep dive to the first era, I will now pass it over to Khánh, who will walk us through how characters were portrayed in the films from 10 years downward.
Let's start our video essay with the first part, the overall insights of LGBT representative characters from movies from 10 years downwards. We have Để Mai Tính in 2010, Hot Boy Nổi Loạn in 2011, Cầu Vồng Không Sắc in 2015, and the last one, Em Chưa 18, in 2017. Homosexual characters in films from 10 years ago often played supporting roles, with characters' portrayals clearly reflecting the society views on LGBTQ+ individuals during that period. These homosexual characters were often portrayed in an exaggeratedly flamboyant way. For example, in the film Để Mai Tính, Thái Hòa character is described as having a stereotypical style, wearing lavish clothes, having dramatic gestures, and behaving sassily. But the inner world and psychological development of these homosexual characters were not deeply explored in the film. In terms of their role, movies from this period often feature homosexual characters as supporting role, providing comedic relief. For instance, in the film Em Chưa 18, the characters' queerness and homosexual aspects, like their appearance, personalities, or actions, are displayed purely for the laughter. Moreover, their supporting roles were also portrayed with exaggerated actions, such as the homosexual characters in Để Mai Tính, always making adult jokes about the male lead character, attempting to seduce him, and all of this just to boost the main romance in the film. On the other hand, from 10 years ago, there also have been some films featuring homosexual characters as the main characters, such as Lam and Long in Hot Boy nổi loạn, Hùng and Hoàng in Cầu vồng không sắc, but the stories often had tragic endings related to their sexual orientation. In summary, 10 years ago, homosexual characters in Vietnamese films were often billed as comedic supporting roles due to their somewhat exaggerated feminine appearance or overly dramatic personalities, just to primarily advance and boost the main character love story, with the films that actually featured them as main characters often had sad or tragic endings for the homosexual characters.
Moving on to the more recent period, from 2016 onward, my name is Linh Dan as we will now examine LGBT characters in 5 films. Song Lang in 2018, Vợ Ba in 2018, Thương Mẹ Con Đi in 2019, Tiệc Trăng Máu in 2020, and Thỏ Ơi in 2026. In these films, LGBT characters are predominantly portrayed with subtle, realistic, and non-exaggerated appearances. Most of them tend to blend in with mainstream society, choosing inconspicuous looks to avoid social scrutiny, as clearly seen with Tuấn Mạnh in Tiệc Trăng Máu. LGBT characters are generally depicted as emotionally sensitive, restrained, and layered, rather than loud, sassy, or one-dimensional, like the former. They often display traits such as caution, gentleness, patience, or quiet resilience, which reflects the cautious navigation many queer individuals adopt in a traditionally conservative society like in Vietnam. Complex or contradictory personalities are common, especially in main roles, allowing the characters to feel more human and relatable instead of serving purely as comic relief or symbols of defiance. This restrained personality type helps create empathy and avoids reinforcing negative stereotypes. Among these movies, conflicts center on societal and internal pressures, as they're also being portrayed more practically. External discrimination, including bullying, assault, and xenophobia, even societal taboos and constraints of feudal polygamous marriage mainly plays the role as the biggest problem most LGBT characters have to encounter. Based on that main problem, internal struggles such as unspoken love, interpersonal tensions are also consequently exist. Accordingly, each character has different ways to tackle with their problems. Some chose to hide away, like Tuấn Mạnh in Tiệc Trăng Máu, and some chose to rebel, challenge against societal judgment. Their actions are typically subtle and non-confrontational. Rather than dramatic resistance, they often endure pressure or express themselves through small, symbolic gestures. Even in later films, actions serve to highlight gradual normalization rather than pure comedy. Most LGBT characters remain in supporting or secondary roles. However, their presence now serves more meaningful purposes, acting like a catalyst for family reflection, mirrors of societal prejudices, or symbols of quiet social change.
After analyzing LGBTQ representation, we can see that audience perceptions in the early 2010s were curious, but still shaped by stereotypes and limited exposure. LGBTQ characters were often portrayed as victims of fate, such as being abandoned, abused, or destined for suffering, like Lam in Hot Boy nổi loạn, reinforcing the idea that their identity was abnormal and socially disconnected. These characters typically had tragic or unresolved endings, creating the impression that being LGBTQ in Vietnam leads to misery. Their stories were highly dramatized, so audience responses were based more on pity rather than true empathy, often viewing them as others at the same time. These films reflect a strong social prejudice. Families often portrayed as sites of rejection, where parents disown their children or force them into heterosexual relationships, as seen in Cầu vồng không sắc. LGBTQ individuals also face public harassment, including mockery, insults, and violence, leading to both emotional and physical harm. Next, I will discuss LGBTQ side characters. In the early 2010s, LGBTQ side characters were mainly used as comic relief. Their primary function was to entertain rather than contribute meaningfully to the narrative. These portrayals were widely accepted and seen as humorous rather than problematic. The comedy often relied on exaggerated traits, especially femininity in male characters, and highlighted how different they were from heterosexual characters. This created a recognizable stereotype that audience could easily identify and laugh at. In the late 2010s and 2020s, audience perception has shifted towards greater humanization and emotional realism. Influenced by globalization and media exposure, LGBTQ characters are no longer defined only by their sexuality, but are portrayed with personal struggles, careers, and emotional depth. Their relationships are also depicted with more nuance, showing conflict, tenderness, and sacrifice, such as Văn and Ian in Thưa Mẹ Con Đi, while films like Làng use symbolisms to encourage empathy rather than judgment. However, prejudice has not disappeared. It has become more subtle. Instead of direct rejection, families often express pressure through expectations, guilt, or silence. LGBTQ individuals are also expected to conform to social norms such as hiding relationships or saving faces for their family. As a result, discrimination has shifted from visible exclusion to more invisible psychological pressure. In the late 2010s and 2020s Vietnamese movies, LGBTQ side characters appear more frequently and are generally accepted, integrated into everyday settings like friendships, families, and workplaces. Characters such as Tuấn Mạnh in Tiệc Trăng Máu reflect this growing normalization. Although some stereotypes remain, portrayals are softer since these characters are often humorous, stylish, or supportive rather than tragic, making them more likable and socially acceptable as seen in toy. Overall audience perception has shifted from viewing them as exaggerated comic relief to accepting them as familiar parts of daily life.
Now, to better visualize the changes over the past decade, let's directly compare the portrayal of LGBT characters between the two periods across our main analytical criteria. In terms of appearance, characters in the early 2010s was often either ordinary or exaggeratedly flamboyant, such as Phạm Hưng Hội in Để Mai Tính. In recent films, portrayal have become much more subtle and diverse, moving away from stereotypes. Regarding personality and inner world, older films presented mostly one-dimensional characters with limited psychological depth. Newer films offer multi-dimensional personalities and rich inner struggles related to family duty, guilt, and quiet rebellion. In terms of conflict and actions, the early 2010s often depicted irreconcilable clashes leading to desperate or tragic outcomes. Recent films still show societal pressure, but the characters display more varied responses, from hiding to rebellion, and sometimes even small glimmers of hope. Finally, in terms of role and narrative function, LGBT characters in the older era were mainly used for comic relief or to advance heterosexual plots, frequently ending in tragedy. In recent years, although still mostly supporting, their roles have become much more meaningful, contributing to themes of family, tradition, and gradual social acceptance. Overall, Vietnamese cinema has shifted from stereotypical tragic and superficial portrayals toward more nuanced, humanized, and empathetic representations.
Conclusion: over the past decade, the portrayal of LGBTQ+ in Vietnamese mainstream cinema has clearly evolved. We have moved from exaggerated stereotypes, comic relief, and tragic endings toward more subtle, realistic, and emotionally deeper representations. But challenges remain. Most LGBT characters are still placed in supporting roles, and fully celebratory queer stories are still rare. As Vietnamese filmmakers continue telling more authentic stories, we hope audience will move toward true understanding and acceptance. Thank you for watching.